We can talk about revenge, love, avenging fallen brothers, or war, and we can tell that tale in an original way, even if it's been done before. The trick, if Titanic's box office tells us anything, is that the setting is everything. I'm DC Ferguson, author of the Wicked Instruments series, and this is 6 tips for setting and theme. So let's get this out of the way. You are a thief. Yes, you. I see you, and I'm talking directly to you. You're a thief. But it'll feel so much better if you confess. See, every so-called original story has been done before. Even the batshit crazy ones like Human Centipede. They've been done before. The point here is that there's nothing wrong with that. If you can accept that you're going to borrow from the books, music, and film you've consumed all your life, then the key is to blend it, mix it with personal experience. That last bit is your advantage. If you can accept that you're going to steal, then bring us to a place we've never been and explore a space in your world that deserves the spotlight. You've decided to settle on the classic spaghetti western, but you'd love if it were set in space. Then you have to give me your experience, not Firefly. Now, what about the wild frontier is it that Star Trek wouldn't tell me about that's the thing that makes your world tick? What I'm saying here is, don't be afraid to explore an area that's been spoiled by dozens of attempts already, both good and bad. What's important is that your world is filtered through your experiences, and take what you bring to it. What do I mean by that? I'm so glad you asked. Since I mentioned it, let's look at Firefly. It brings the cowboy western feel to space travel. Captain Malcolm here, though, he's not that different from, say, Han Solo, is he? I mean, he sure isn't. And Firefly isn't often compared to Star Wars because the feeling of the show is totally different, both in tone and the world. Star Wars is a universe of millions of different aliens, wild and different. Firefly doesn't stray far from the human feeling, staying very grounded and less alien. Compare that to, say, the original RoboCop and its remake. Yeah, if you've seen my previous videos, you already know I have no love for this remake. But, that aside, here's why fancy people get paid to say this stuff and hated it more than I did. The original imagines a Detroit without hope, without control, and a corporation gone drunk with power, paving a road to the future on the backs of anyone that can't afford upscale condos. It was a critique on 80s corporate money and lifestyle, and how it evades justice. This film is like a freaking onion. The older and wiser you get, the more and more layers and nuance of what was really just a cool robot revenge story suddenly pops up. And therein lies the problem with the remake. It's a robot revenge story. That's it. Nothing more. There's no deeper meanings, symbolism, anything. There's a handful of messages in the movie that are not so much tongue-in-cheek as they are spoon-fed to you as a nod to the original, but there's no substance behind it. For all its CGI, it brought nothing new to the table. Badass suit, though. So sad. You've created your world. It's gorgeous, full of excitement and mystery. You decide you're going to put a ring on it and call it yours forever. Then, like a bad marriage, you spend the next years of your life trying to change it into something it's not. The world you create should have tones and beats that sync up with each other. For example, The Matrix would feel really silly if it went from hardcore sci-fi and kung fu influences to something else, like, say, imagine Neo downloads data into his brain and implies to Morpheus, "I know Irish folk dancing." And it's spun off into a musical montage for 5 minutes. That's crazy, right? Well, it's no more crazy than The Matrix 2 and 3 switching the tone from kung fu influences of a chosen fighter to the Neo as a messiah theme of the sequels. Ever notice how The Matrix original has leather and trench coats and vinyl, and it all looked badass and we never questioned it, but the follow-ups were kind of, I don't know, dirty, maybe even a little cheesy? See, you keep pushing a square peg into a round hole in your world long enough, and like jamming a muffin top into a pair of yoga pants, the parts that were working in there before are now spilling out and looking awkward. There was probably a better way to describe that, but I love the visuals. Plus, it brings me to my next point. Much like J. Jonah Jameson here knows what he wants, I want your dolphins. This point will become very clear in a minute, but what I'm getting at is you want to present your world to me in a way that puts all the cards on the table. This is how my world works, and if you don't like it, tough. At least we're being honest with each other, with you as the world builder and me as your audience. Throw me curveballs and twists, just in your story, not in your world. In the genre of great cyberpunk, there's the granddaddy of them all, Blade Runner. The world of sci-fi noir and the concept of Shadowrun were built on this film. Philip K. Dick literally made up a genre that was a template for the future world intrigue that most modern sci-fi doesn't even know it's paying homage to. And this man all but died a pauper, folks. Seriously, let that one sink in. A lesser-known but equally enjoyable Philip K. Dick work, The Minority Report, was a blockbuster film thanks to the star power of Tom Cruise. But look closely at the film. It follows Dick's noir style that you see in Blade Runner, chasing after a mystery, full of suspense, in a future world where crazy stuff can happen. But we know all this crazy stuff about the future predicting handed down by the dreams of 3 fortune tellers about 10 minutes into the movie. It lays all the cards on the table and it says, this is my world, these are my rules, now watch what I do with them. It's like a damn magic trick. You see the world of the deck of cards, and you know he's going to guess your card in the end, but you're still shocked when it happens. Then there's Johnny Mnemonic. I freaking love this movie. It's a live-action Shadowrun game. It tells me Keanu Reeves has a hard drive in his head, he smuggles data. An assassin sent to kill him has a laser whip in his fingernail. His partner has wired reflexes installed from a chop shop. I'm along for the ride. But then Johnny picks a side, tries to unearth the mystery of this data in his head. He reaches out to an underground gang of truth seekers, and their hacker is... If you guessed a dolphin, you either saw this movie or you think on another level than I do. This movie just absolutely jumps the shark and gets silly to a point of nonsensical because the world did not properly prepare me for dolphin hackers. Also, I'm pretty sure keeping him in such a small enclosure like this is animal abuse. But give me the dolphins up front, that's all I'm saying. That's the point. I've done a few examples here of the future, so let's dip into the present for this one. The 1979 sci-fi thriller, Time After Time, featured H.G. Wells building a real functioning time machine, which his close friend uses to escape into the future before authorities realize he's Jack the Ripper. Caught up in guilt, Wells goes into 1979 San Francisco to free the future of the monster he's unleashed. So, here we have a new take on time travel, starring H.G. Wells and Jack the Ripper, taking place in what was a modern year at the time. This almost sounds like fan fiction, right? So then, how is it a beloved classic of sci-fi strong enough to have a cult following to get their hearts broken when ABC thought it was a swell idea to reboot it into a weekly series? Well, it's simple. It created a world that was inspired by our past, featured a brutal monster that our hero would have to slay, and told a story so good we didn't question it. If you remember my previous video on storyline pitfalls, you might recall that I said, your story is the train that drives us around your world and lets us see what you've made. Sometimes, even if we're treading on familiar territory and we're not all that captivated about what's out the window, the train itself can be so luxurious and so enjoyable, none of that matters. What I'm getting at is that your world building and your story are intertwined. That one can make up for the other's weaknesses. So, yeah, you can make another vampire story. Have him be the creepy neighbor next door. Have him recite back his lineage to an astonished reporter. Have her be an alien that walks around naked through Britain at night. I can't believe I'm even going to say this, but yeah, make them sparkle. Just make sure your world design and your original story complement each other. Tell the right story for your world, and tell it the best you can. Remember Multiplicity? No? I really was the only one that watched that? No. Anyway. Michael Keaton clones himself, and eventually his clones make a clone of themselves, and that one's, well, not quite right. It was a hilarious movie. The lesson we take from this one is a copy of a copy is a watered-down effect that is never quite as good as the original. If you can accept rule number 1, that we're all thieves, then you know your work is inspired and paying homage to the worlds you've loved the most. What you can't forget, however, is that they were inspired too. Sometimes you can get so far removed from the source of that inspiration that you're now copying a copy, and the world is just plain not as good as the ones that came before it. I'm going to use an original example here because I don't want to specifically call out any one movie, book, or show. Some are a little guilty of it, but still give us compelling stories or cool worlds, as per the last rule. Some are very guilty and still enjoyable for what they are. Instead, we're going to look at XI. XI is the first robot with an artificial learning core in his brain. He's built as a military weapon. His sole purpose is to kill enemy nations and prove his creator's success. Enter John, a hardened military officer with a darkened past. He's sent to go after XI when he goes rogue and goes off the grid. Now John has to hunt down the perfect killing machine. It's the next blockbuster action movie, right? Except I'm basing XI off the movie I, Robot, which itself is a watered-down version of the book, which was inspired by Frankenstein. By making this an action movie in an action world in the far-flung future, we're forgetting that the story of the world of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was all about humanity. It was about an abomination that saw himself as the proof one man had become a god in a dark, twisted mirror. In a way, the monster was more human than his creator because it regretted what it had made. You lose all of this undertone and subtlety when you copy a copy. So think about what inspires you, and then maybe think about what inspired them. Ask yourself if you're doing justice to the world you're creating, or if your setting and theme is just another case of Frankenstein in the future. Alright, here we go. It's 1865. The Civil War is over and the country mourns the assassination of President Lincoln. Somewhere, deep in the farm country of Pennsylvania, a mad doctor took a sample of the fallen president's blood, knowing that someday, somehow, science would find a way to bring him back when the country needed him most. Now it's 2049. The Earth is at war with refugees from another world. Only Gabriel Lincoln can unite us all and bring us back together. Get ready for Honest Gabe. The number of logical leaps and bounds that stupid story I just made up have there are phenomenal. Always keep in mind, your world is intended for an audience. If you're telling a story because it amuses you, and you know that there are issues with the concept but soldier through anyway, you have to remember one thing: be humble. None of us are perfect, and we're all going to fall in the mud eventually. Sometimes it's a really bitter pill to swallow. When I was writing the first draft of The Singer and the Charlatan, I wrote the first 250 pages in one continuous week-long binge. Now, some of you read the book and you're saying, but it's only like 180 pages. And you're right. When I finished the first draft completely, it was 400 pages. Author C.J. Perry, a very close friend of mine, warned me to split the book in two. I knew better. I didn't want to hear it. I sent it to an old friend, my editor Michelle Luxemburger, and a few beta readers. One of them talked about laugh fatigue, a term I had never heard before, but I instantly understood what it was. I was writing a fantasy comedy. Comedies in film are an hour-long stand-up act, or a 90-minute chuckle. There's no such thing as a 3.5-hour Scarface of comedy. There's no Braveheart with laughs. The point is, I wasn't considering who the intended audience of my world was. I was just telling the story I wanted to tell. So, I split the book in half, and that's how I got The Singer and the Charlatan and the Princess and the Holy Juggernaut. Consider your audience when crafting your world. If you want an action setting in the future, in space, maybe Wizard of Oz is a good inspired tale that complements it. The Great Gatsby does not. Theme and setting are tricky devils, because it sets a tone for your world. Unlike a lot of other videos where I've talked about going it alone and doing it yourself, this is one of those things where having a trusted group of friends to bounce ideas off of goes a long way. Be open to criticism and never afraid to tear down and start again until you get it right. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I want to hear from you folks in the comments about what you'd like to see. I'm DC Ferguson for the Art of the Arcane blog. Now have fun and get crafting.